The courtroom was buzzing with low murmurs, like the uneasy hum of bees before a storm. Sunlight pushed its way through the tall, stained glass windows, spilling fractured colors across the polished wooden floor. At the center, a teenage boy stood stiff at the defendant's table. His hoodie was wrinkled, his sneakers scuffed, and his hands trembled slightly, though his eyes, sharp and unflinching, betrayed something more, something the room didn't expect. Across the bench, Judge Harland adjusted his glasses and leaned back, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. To him, this was already a done deal. Another troubled kid, another delinquent, another waste of the court's time. He didn't see a human being. He saw a stereotype. "Boy," the judge said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you think you're clever, showing up here like that? In my courtroom? You better know your place." The spectators chuckled quietly, some shaking their heads. The bailiff didn't even try to hide his smirk. Everyone thought they knew how this story would end. A kid against the system, no chance. But what no one realized was that this boy was about to flip the entire courtroom upside down. What do you think? Was the judge being fair here, or was he already biased before the trial even began? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The boy's name was Jalen Carter, 17 years old, smart, quiet, misunderstood. He grew up in a neighborhood where the sound of sirens at night was as common as crickets, where opportunities felt more like distant dreams than achievable goals. His mom worked double shifts at a diner, his father had been gone since Jalen was 5, and his older brother, well, let's just say he got lost to the streets long ago. But Jalen was different. While most kids on his block escaped into the noise of the streets, he escaped into books. He had a sharp mind for logic, puzzles, and arguments. Teachers noticed he had the kind of brain that belonged in a debate team, maybe even a courtroom someday. But the world around him didn't give him many chances to prove it. So when he found himself standing in front of a judge, accused of theft and vandalism, the irony wasn't lost on him. He, of all people, knew how the system looked at kids like him. Guilty until proven innocent. Judge Harland tapped his pen against the bench, his eyes narrowing. "Well, Jalen, the evidence is stacked against you. You were found near the scene, your fingerprints are on the object, and the witnesses say they saw you. What do you have to say for yourself?" The courtroom leaned in, waiting for Jalen's response. But instead of panicking, Jalen straightened, his shoulders, his lips curled into a faint smile. It was almost defiant. "I'd like to represent myself," he said calmly. The room erupted with laughter. Even the prosecutor chuckled, shaking his head. Judge Harland raised his eyebrows, amused. "Represent yourself? Boy, this isn't some TV drama. You're just a teenager. Sit down and let the court-appointed attorney handle it." But Jalen stood his ground. "With all due respect, sir, I know the law, and I know my rights. I choose to represent myself." The smirk faded slightly from the judge's face. He wasn't used to defiance, especially not from a kid like Jalen. What no one in the courtroom realized was that Jalen had been preparing for this moment. For weeks, locked in his small bedroom. Late at night, he devoured law books he borrowed from the library. Criminal procedure, constitutional rights, evidence handling, he read it all. He even memorized courtroom strategies, watching hours of legal trials online, pausing, rewinding, studying every detail like a chess player memorizing moves. He wasn't just a defendant, he was about to become the courtroom's most unexpected attorney. The prosecutor, a man in his 40s named Mr. Gaines, leaned back with a smug grin. "Your Honor, this is absurd. He's a child. This is nothing but a stunt." But Jalen didn't flinch. "Actually, Your Honor," he said firmly, "the Sixth Amendment gives me the right to represent myself if I so choose. The case Ferretta versus California set that precedent back in 1975. The court ruled that forcing a lawyer onto a defendant against their will is unconstitutional." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge blinked, momentarily caught off guard. The spectators whispered to each other. "This kid knew case law?" Judge Harland cleared his throat. "Fine, if that's what you want, you'll have your chance. But don't say I didn't warn you." And just like that, the trial began. The prosecutor presented the case first. He spoke with authority, painting Jalen as a reckless teen who broke into a store late at night and stole electronics before vandalizing the property. He had witnesses, fingerprints, and even a blurry security camera photo that, at first glance, seemed to match Jalen. The jury nodded, the judge looked convinced, and the spectators whispered in agreement. It seemed open and shut. But when it was Jalen's turn, he rose slowly, walked to the center of the courtroom, and looked the jury in the eyes. His voice was calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "what you just heard sounds convincing, but convincing doesn't mean true. And in this courtroom, Truth is what matters. Then he did something no one expected. He tore apart the evidence, piece by piece. He pointed out that the fingerprints on the object were partial and inconclusive, that the so-called eyewitnesses were more than 50 feet away in the dark. And when he projected the blurry security footage onto the screen, he asked the jury a single question. Can you say with 100% certainty that this is me? The room fell silent again, because when they looked closely, the figure in the footage was wearing a jacket, something Jalen never owned. Judge Harlan shifted in his seat. The prosecutor frowned, flipping through his notes, suddenly less confident, and Jalen wasn't done. He pointed out inconsistencies in the police report, questioned why certain evidence had been collected but not presented, and even brought up a possible alibi, something his public defender had overlooked entirely. Every word he spoke chipped away at the case against him. The spectators who once mocked him now leaned forward, fascinated. But with each point Jalen raised, the judge's smirk twisted into something else, annoyance. Because it wasn't just that Jalen was defending himself well, it was that he was exposing cracks in the system Judge Harlan thought was airtight. At one point, Jalen questioned a witness, a store clerk who swore they saw him near the scene. Sir, Jalen asked, what color was the suspect's hoodie that night? Red, the witness said confidently. And what color is my hoodie today? The man hesitated. Red. And how do you know I didn't just wear this to match your story? The courtroom gasped. The witness stammered. Suddenly, his certainty didn't seem so certain anymore. The judge slammed his gavel. Enough! Don't play games in my courtroom! But Jalen stood tall, refusing to back down. I'm not playing games, Your Honor. I'm fighting for my life. The room went silent again. For the first time, even the judge had no comeback. But what Jalen didn't know was that the real battle hadn't even started yet, because just as the trial seemed to turn in his favor, a shocking revelation was about to flip the case upside down once again. The courtroom's tension was thicker than smoke. You could feel it in the way the jurors leaned forward, in the way the spectators whispered nervously, in the way even the prosecutor's polished confidence began to crack. Jalen had done the impossible. He had poked holes in what everyone thought was a watertight case. But the judge wasn't pleased. Judge Harlan's smirk had long vanished, replaced by a tight jaw and narrowed eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Jalen, a teenager, a defendant, a young black man daring to stand his ground in a system designed to silence him. The gavel slammed again. Order in the court, the judge barked, though his voice betrayed more frustration than control. Jalen took a step back to his table, breathing slowly. He knew he had shaken the courtroom, but he also knew something else. People like Judge Harlan didn't like to lose. And when someone with power feels cornered, that's when they fight the dirtiest. The prosecutor, Mr. Gaines, straightened his tie and forced a confident smile, though his eyes darted nervously toward his notes. He wasn't about to let a teenager dismantle his case without a fight. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Gaines said, pacing dramatically, don't be fooled by clever words. The facts are clear. The fingerprints, the witnesses, the footage. The defendant wants you to believe. He's smarter than the law, but don't forget, this isn't a debate team. This is real life. Then he dropped a bombshell. New evidence has just been submitted this morning, a text message exchange between the defendant and an unknown accomplice, arranging to meet at the very store that was burglarized. The jury gasped. The spectators whispered louder. Even Jalen's mother, sitting in the back row, clutching her purse like a lifeline, covered her mouth in shock. The judge leaned forward, clearly satisfied. Well, Mr. Carter, looks like your little performance might be over. But Jalen didn't panic. Instead, he calmly asked to review the supposed evidence. The bailiff handed him a packet of printed text messages. Jalen scanned the pages carefully, his eyes narrowing. Then he looked up. Your Honor, he said, holding up the papers, this is inadmissible. These so-called text messages don't have phone numbers attached, no metadata, no verification of the sender. For all we know, these could have been typed up this morning by anyone in this courtroom. The prosecutor's smile faltered. Jalen pressed on. Not only that, but the law requires the prosecution to share all evidence with the defense before trial begins. Dropping this on me in the middle of proceedings is a violation of discovery rules. This evidence should be thrown out immediately. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The jury exchanged uneasy glances. The judge's face darkened, and, reluctantly, Judge Harlan had no choice. Objection sustained. The new evidence is inadmissible. The prosecutor clenched his fists. Another blow to his case. By now, the spectators weren't laughing at Jalen anymore. They were rooting for him. A few even nodded when he spoke, impressed impressed by his calm dismantling of the prosecution's arguments. But just as hope began to bloom, in the room, something unexpected happened. From the back of the courtroom, a man in a dark suit entered quietly. He walked with authority, his presence demanding attention without a word. The bailiff whispered something to the judge, who immediately straightened his posture. Jalen noticed the change in the judge's face. Whoever that man was, he mattered. The man took a seat in the front row, his eyes fixed on Jalen like he was studying every move, and Jalen's heart skipped, because deep down, he had a feeling. This trial wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. It was about something bigger. The next witness was called Officer Brennan, the police officer who had arrested Jalen that night. Brennan strutted to the stand with arrogance, convinced his word alone would seal the case. "Officer," Jalen began, his voice steady, "can you walk us through the events of that night?" Brennan smirked. "Sure, I got a call about a burglary. I saw the defendant running near the store. I stopped him, searched him, and found items matching the stolen goods." The jury nodded. It sounded damning, but Jalen leaned forward. "And did you have a warrant for that search?" The officer hesitated. "Well, no. But under probable cause?" "Probable cause," Jalen interrupted. "Or racial profiling," the courtroom gasped. The officer's face reddened. "Objection," the prosecutor shouted. "Sustained," the judge barked, glaring at Jalen. But the damage was already done. The seed of doubt was planted. Jalen continued carefully. "Officer, can you confirm whether the evidence you claim to have found was properly logged?" The officer shuffled uncomfortably. "Yes, mostly," Jalen pressed. "Or not at all?" the officer stammered. The jury exchanged glances again. Suddenly, the credibility of the very man who arrested Jalen was crumbling. By this point, it was obvious. Jalen was winning. His calm dismantling of evidence, his knowledge of law, his refusal to back down, it was working, and Judge Harland hated it. At every opportunity, he cut Jalen off. He sustained objections against him, but overruled objections from the prosecutor. He sighed loudly when Jalen spoke, rolled his eyes at his arguments, and even muttered under his breath. It wasn't just bias, it was personal. At one point, when Jalen tried to submit a library checkout receipt proving he had been studying that night, the judge snapped, "Enough with these theatrics. You're wasting the court's time." But before Jalen could respond, the man in the dark suit from the front row finally stood. "Actually, Your Honor," he said, his voice firm, "I think this young man is making an excellent point." The entire courtroom froze. Judge Harlan's face paled. "What are you doing here?" he muttered under his breath. The man adjusted his tie and stepped forward. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm the head of internal affairs for the State Judicial Department, and I've been observing these proceedings very closely." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, shock. Jalen blinked, stunned. The man wasn't just anyone. He was the one person who had the power to investigate judges, prosecutors, and police misconduct. Marcus Hale turned to the judge. "And from what I've seen so far, I have serious concerns about the fairness of this trial." The judge's gavel slammed, his voice shaking. "This is highly irregular." "No," Marcus interrupted, his tone razor sharp. "What's irregular is the way you've mocked, dismissed, and obstructed a defendant exercising his constitutional rights. That ends now." The spectators broke into murmurs again, louder this time. The jurors sat straighter, their eyes flicking between Jalen and Marcus Hale. For the first time, the power in the courtroom shifted, not toward the judge, not toward the prosecutor, but toward Jalen, and he knew it. Taking a deep breath, Jalen turned back to the jury. His voice was steady, but inside, his heart was pounding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "I told you from the start, this case wasn't about me being clever. It was about truth, and now you're starting to see the truth for yourselves." The courtroom fell silent once more, because what came next would decide everything. The air in the courtroom had changed. You could almost hear it, the shifting of power, the crack in the judge's authority, the fear in the prosecutor's eyes. For the first time since this trial began, Jalen wasn't the one on defense. The system was Marcus Hale, head of internal affairs, remained standing at the front of the room, his gaze fixed on Judge Harland. The once dominant judge who had mocked and belittled Jalen at every turn now looked like a man cornered. "Your Honor," Marcus said evenly, "you've allowed bias to dictate this trial from the start. Your conduct has not only disrespected this young man, but also this entire courtroom." The spectators whispered fiercely. Some nodded in agreement. Others sat wide-eyed, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Judge Harland gripped his gavel, his knuckles white. "This is outrageous. You have no jurisdiction in this matter." Marcus's tone sharpened. "On the contrary, oversight of judicial integrity is precisely precisely my jurisdiction. And from what I've observed here, this trial borders on misconduct. Continue this way, and it won't be Jalen Carter's freedom on the line. It'll be your career." The judge froze. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. For the first time, the balance of fear had shifted. Marcus returned to his seat, leaving the weight of his words to hang heavy in the air. All eyes turned to Jalen. The judge, though seething, had no choice now but to let him speak. Jalen stood, his shoulders squared, his voice steady. He didn't pace, didn't shout. He simply spoke with the quiet conviction of someone who had carried a burden far too long. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "you've heard the prosecution's story. They want you to believe I'm just another criminal statistic. They want you to believe that because I was near a store, because I fit a description, I must be guilty." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But you've also seen the truth. You've seen evidence mishandled. You've seen testimony fall apart under the weight of its own contradictions. You've seen new evidence fabricated at the last minute. Desperate attempts to make me fit a crime I didn't commit." Jalen took a breath, scanning the faces of the jurors. Ordinary people, but people who could change his fate. "This case isn't just about me. It's about every young man who's ever been told his voice doesn't matter. About every person who's been judged before they've spoken a single word. About whether the law is truly about justice or just about winning." He lowered his voice, soft but unwavering. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for fairness. Look at the facts, not the assumptions. Look at the truth, not the story they tried to sell you. If you do that, there's only one verdict you can reach." The room was silent, the kind of silence that carries weight. The judge had no choice but to dismiss the jury for deliberation. The jurors filed out quietly, casting final glances at Jalen. Minutes stretched into hours. The courtroom buzzed with speculation. Jalen sat at his table, his hands folded, his heart pounding in rhythm with a ticking clock. His mother prayed silently in the back row, whispering words only she and God could hear. The prosecutor kept shuffling papers nervously, though everyone knew it was pointless. His case had collapsed. Finally, the bailiff's voice cut through. The tension. "All rise." The jury returned, their faces unreadable. The foreman stood, holding the slip of paper that would decide everything. "In the matter of the state versus Jalen Carter," the foreman said, his voice steady, "we, the jury, find the defendant." The room held its breath. "Not guilty!" The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cheers, sobs of relief. Jalen's mother broke down, clutching her chest, tears streaming down her face. Spectators whispered words like "finally" and "justice." Jalen closed his eyes, his knees almost buckling. The weight he had carried for months lifted in an instant. But the most powerful reaction came not from Jalen, but from the judge. Judge Harlan slammed his gavel, his face red with rage. "Order! I will have order!" But no one was listening anymore. The verdict had spoken louder than his gavel ever could. And then Marcus Hale stood once more. "Your Honor," he said coldly, "consider this trial a warning. I will personally be reviewing your conduct here today. If I find what I think I'll find, this may be the last case you preside over." The judge's face drained of color. His authority, the thing he prized above all, was slipping through his fingers. As the crowd filed out, reporters surged toward Jalen, microphones and cameras flashing. But he didn't grandstand. He didn't celebrate loudly. He simply turned to them and said, "I wasn't supposed to win. People like me rarely do. But today wasn't just about me. It was about proving that truth can still cut through lies. I hope no one else has to fight this hard just to be heard." His words weren't polished. They weren't rehearsed, but they were real, and that made them unforgettable. Weeks later, headlines told the rest of the story. Judge Harlan under investigation for bias and misconduct. Officer Brennan suspended pending review of arrest records. Prosecutor Gaines faces scrutiny over fabricated evidence. And in every article, one name stood out. Jalen Carter, not as a criminal, not as a statistic, but as the teenager who had defended himself against the system and won. Marcus Hale kept his word. The judge who once mocked Jalen now faced a trial of his own, the kind of trial where every decision he'd ever made would be scrutinized under the harshest light. And Jalen, he walked free, not just free from charges, but free from the shadow they tried to place over his life. He returned to his studies, sharper, stronger, determined, because he knew now that knowledge wasn't just power, it was survival. And the next time someone tried to underestimate him, they'd think twice.